Daniel Sports Central will be giving you guys my final college football rankings for this 2021 through 22 college football season. And the season has wrapped up. Your national champion is the Georgia Bulldogs, and quite a season it was. From all the upsets and everything, I mean, this season had a lot of upsets and a lot of surprise teams, and that made for an excellent football season. I mean, this was one of the most exciting that I've seen in quite some time here in this 2021 through 22 season. I mean, we saw several massive surprise teams, and Georgia, of course, being as dominant as they were, it was fitting to see them beat Alabama for the national title. But that being said, today we'll be kind of recapping this 2021 college football season, and I'll be giving you guys my final rankings in the process. So that being said, let's get into it. Number one, obviously going to be Georgia. Bulldogs won the national title over Alabama 33-18, and the Bulldogs it was a huge season for them, obviously winning a national title. But I mean, this team was so dominant in the regular season. They were 12-0 through the regular season, and I mean, after they lost in the SEC championship game to Alabama, I mean, there were some questions about whether or not this Bulldog team was for real. Especially, I mean, their strength of schedule was strong in the regular season, but it wasn't quite as strong as some other SEC teams. So, I mean, there were some questions there, but the Bulldogs, I mean, there's no denying that team was incredible this season, and we kind of expected that in the offseason, looking at how much talent they had and a couple of the transfers as well. So, yeah, Georgia, obviously number one, they're 14-1 to finish out the season, and this was their year. Alabama, number two, lost to Georgia in the national title, and they finished out the season 13-2. But Crimson Tide, I mean, there's no doubt that Georgia and Alabama are the two best teams in the nation. I mean, Michigan, I mean, they looked excellent in the Big Ten title game and down the stretch. I mean, they beat Ohio State. Quite a season for Michigan. I mean, there's nothing to be disappointed about if you're a Wolverine fan, because, I mean, Michigan, plenty of strides were made and finally beat Ohio State. So obviously that's a huge positive for them. And Michigan, I mean, they got a bright future. I mean, they're still a pretty young football team. So Michigan definitely a team to watch out for in the future as we look forward to 2022. But Baylor's my number four. Baylor, how about them? That is, I mean, it turns out Baylor might be the huge surprise team of the season. Who would have thought? I mean, Oklahoma State was a big surprise team. You could say Cincinnati because they made the playoff. Michigan, of course, but Baylor really stands out to me as the surprise team of the season here. I mean, the Bears, of course, having as much inexperience as they had going into this season. There were a ton of question marks, and this team played excellent. I mean, 12-2 is an insane record. Big 12 champions and Sugar Bowl champions. This team beat Ole Miss in the Sugar Bowl, which was huge. I mean, 21-7, shutting down the Rebels. And I understand that Ole Miss dealt with a couple of injuries, like Matt Corral, the big one there. He got injured in that game. So, I mean, huge condolences to him, and hopefully he has a safe recovery. But yeah, for Baylor, I mean, number four, they've had an incredible season. Huge credit to them. They finish out in the top four. Number five, Ohio State beat Utah in what was an insane bowl game, Rose Bowl. Quite a matchup there between those two teams, and Ohio State got the win 48-45. I would say that Rose Bowl potentially the best game of the season. I mean, from start to finish, that was an insane game. Looked like Utah was going to take off there, but Ohio State stuck around and got the win, and they finished out the season 11-2. Cincinnati lost to Alabama 6-27 in the semifinals, and obviously tough loss to finish out the season there for the Bearcats, but there's nothing to be disappointed about if you're a Cincinnati fan there. I mean, it's been an excellent season, finally made it to the college football playoff, and even though Cincinnati does take a few losses this offseason, they were very experienced this season, and they won't be quite as experienced next year. But Cincinnati, I mean, there's potential now. We now know in a 4-team college football playoff, a group of 5 team can make the playoff, and it's an insane. I mean, it takes a lot of upsets as this season had, but ended up happening there. Oklahoma State's my number 7. They beat Notre Dame 37-35. Gutsy win there for the Cowboys, and they're 12-2, and kind of a tough end of the season. I mean, obviously that's a huge win in the Fiesta Bowl there against Notre Dame, but Oklahoma State, they could have been in the playoff if they could have only beaten Baylor in the Big 12 title game. If they would have beaten them, they would have been in the college football playoffs. So kind of unfortunate for Oklahoma State, but got a good win to finish out the season against Notre Dame. Moving on to 8 through 14, Michigan State's my number 8. They beat Pitt 31-21 to finish out the season at 11-2. So yeah, quite a season for the Spartans. I mean, this is a football team that was just horrendous in 2020, and many people expected them to be a bottom feeder this season in the Big Ten, which is insane because they finished out the season in the top 10, won a New Year's Six bowl game, and 11-2 record. Just an insane season for Michigan State. And I will say this again, I mean, this was a season just packed with surprise teams, and that's why it was such a great season, one of the most exciting that I've seen in a long time. was because of that. I mean, we saw, for example, back in 2019, we saw probably two surprise teams. You could say Minnesota and Baylor were your two main ones. 2020 included like 3 or 4, but this season, I mean, we saw like 7 or 8, maybe even 9 surprise teams. Like you could say Michigan, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State, Michigan State, potentially Ole Miss. Who would have expected? Well, I mean, they got a great quarterback, so I mean, many people expected Ole Miss to be good, but I mean, still in the top 10. And I mean, Utah, they won the Pac-12. Pittsburgh, how about them as well? So we saw a lot of surprise teams this season, and that's why it was such a great one. But yeah, Michigan State, especially for them, 11-2, great way to finish out the season. Notre Dame is my number 9. They lost to Oklahoma State 35-37, finishing out the season at 11-2. Ole Miss is number 10. They lost to Baylor 7-21. Tough situation there, though, not having Matt Corral for the majority of that game. Made it pretty tough for the Rebels, but still, I mean, great season for them, finishing out at 10-3. There's nothing to complain about there. And I really hope that Matt Corral is a full recovery and he has a bright future in the NFL draft. I mean, he's got the talent to be a top-tier quarterback in the NFL. We'll see what happens, but yeah, definitely, hopefully he has a full recovery. Oklahoma's my number 11. They beat Oregon 47-32. Great way to finish out the season there, but there are a lot of question marks for the Sooners heading into this offseason here. You got Spencer Rattler, who's now in South Carolina. Caleb Williams is in the transfer portal. We don't know whether he's coming back to OU, but if I was into betting, I would say Caleb Williams is probably headed to USC with Lincoln Riley. So, I mean, Venables, of course, I like him as a coach. I think he's going to do a good job, but Oklahoma, there are several question marks for this football team heading into this offseason now. Utah's number 12. They lost to Ohio State 45-48. Now, that was quite a game there for Utah and Ohio State. Rose Bowl once again, and Utah had a great year, Pac-12 champions, and 10-4. Who would have seen that coming? They've had a great year, finishing out in the top 15. Pittsburgh, number 13. They lost to Michigan State 21-31, but obviously they didn't have Kenny Pickett in that game. So it was, then again, Michigan State didn't have Kenneth Walker, but I mean, both teams didn't really have their major key players. But Pittsburgh still, great football season. I mean, they're your ACC champions, so definitely nothing to complain about there. And they finished out the season at 11-3. Clemson, watch out for them going into next season. I think Clemson, this was just one down year for them. They will be back at the top next season. The way they finished out the season, I mean, the first couple months, this team just did not look like themselves. And, I mean, it makes sense because of how inexperienced this team has been this season. And you can tell this team has started to click down the stretch. And against Iowa State, got the big win there, 20-13. And they finished out the season at 10-3. Clemson is a team to watch out for next season. They're returning quite a bit of talent. And, yeah, I like where Clemson is headed going into 2022. So they had one down year, but Clemson, wouldn't be surprised at all to see them as a contender for the college football playoff next season again. 15-21, Kentucky beat Iowa, huge win there, 2017. They're another surprise team. Kentucky, the Wildcats, 10-3, a great season for them. And NC State, of course, had their game canceled, unfortunately. So that was a tough break there for NC State, but they're 9-3 to finish out the year. Louisiana, they beat Marshall 36-21. A great way to finish out the season for them. They finished out the season at 13-1. So, yeah, Louisiana, excellent season for them. BYU, one of the biggest disappointments this bowl season by far, and I understand, but I mean, they got put in a bad bowl game against. I mean, UAB is a good football team, but they're not even close to the level that BYU was in the regular season. So, kind of interesting there, but. Yeah, obviously the Cougars, they just did not look motivated for the majority of that game, and they took the loss by 3, 20-31, and credit to UAB for getting the win. But, I mean, that's a game that I would say BYU should have won, certainly, but they finished out the season at 10-3. Not a bad year, except for, of course, that brutal game against UAB. Arkansas, number 19, they're also a surprise team. They beat Penn State 24-10, 9-4 to finish out the year, and they've had a great season as well. Who would have thought the Razorbacks would be as good as they were? Oregon, number 20, they lost to Oklahoma, completely just fell apart down the stretch, if you ask me, with the Ducks. I mean, this team lost to Utah twice, got blown out twice there, and their head coach takes off, Cristobal. So, lots of question marks for Oregon as well heading into the future. But, I mean, yeah, I mean, the Ducks are a good football team, and there's still plenty of talent on that team, but they've got some question marks certainly heading into the future. Wisconsin, number 21, they beat Arizona State. They were 9-4. So, yeah, not a bad way to finish out the season there for Wisconsin in a defensive battle against Arizona State. The Badgers, also a team to watch out for in the future. And moving on to 22-25, Texas A&M had their game canceled as well. Well, they just got pulled out of that game because of COVID issues, unfortunately. But, for Texas A&M, still not a bad season. I mean, 8-4 is where they sit now, but of course, I think their signature win of the season is one that everyone's going to remember there, that big win over Alabama in College Station back in the middle of the season. Houston, number 23, they actually ended up beating Auburn. That was a huge win for the Cougars to finish out the season, 12-2, another surprise team. Once again, we've got 10 surprise teams that we've seen, 10 significant ones certainly, and Houston, you could definitely say, was one of them. I mean, Houston was a team that heading into the season, they hadn't had a good season in a long time, and here they are, 12-2 to finish out the season. So yeah, huge credit to them. Wake Forest beat Rutgers, another surprise team. Wake Forest 11-3 beat Rutgers 38-10, and it was kind of unfortunate Wake Forest didn't get to play Texas A&M. That would have been an interesting game. Wake Forest obviously being a top team in the ACC, one of the last undefeated teams remaining in the nation. I mean, they were undefeated for a long time, and yeah, so Wake Forest, I mean, it was a huge season for them, and looking forward to seeing where they go in the future. They've got a bright future, if you ask me. And San Diego State, number 25, rounds it out. They beat UTSA 38-24. UTSA was definitely a storyline of the season as well. They were undefeated for a long time, and the committee would not rank them, and UTSA, turns out they took a couple losses to finish out the year, but still not a bad year for them. And San Diego State, of course, 12-2 to finish out the year. Not a bad season for them either. Their first five out, Purdue, they had quite a season. I mean, they beat Michigan State and Iowa. When Iowa was ranked number 2, Michigan State was ranked number 3. So they can definitely hold that high, and they got a huge bowl win over Tennessee and what was quite a matchup. And Iowa number 27, Utah State number 28, Minnesota 29, and UTSA number 30. Dropped out from the previous rankings. Iowa was number 22. They took a loss, and Iowa really crumbled down the stretch, and UTSA, of course, took a loss as well in their bowl game, so I'm going to take them out as well. But that being said, it's going to wrap it up for my final rankings for this college football season. I'll be giving you guys my way too early college football rankings. I usually do that sometime in late January, so I'd say in about a couple of weeks you guys can expect that. But until then, appreciate you guys all watching.